Well, I guess we can go ahead and get started. It's a few minutes after 12, and then as people join, we can reintroduce you, Harry, if we need to. Well, Catherine, thank you for joining. So speaking today on operational readiness is Harry Benson, who's CAI's Global Director of Human Performance. So Harry, I'll turn it over to you, and we will begin.
All right. Thanks, Nathan. Welcome. I appreciate it. You coming to this discussion. I'd ideally like it to, be kind of workshop oriented, to where if you have any questions or ideas or thoughts, you can chime in. There's certainly no reason not to. I think the content lends itself to kind of shared learning quite a bit, and that's why I call it a workshop. Operational readiness is something we all strive for, but what we want to do today is kind of decide or define what we consider operational readiness. It will change or vary by site and company, etc. What the focus is in the industry and so forth. But we're going to dive into a little bit about what it is, from a general definition as well as a little more specific, and then some of we're going to define a problem statement around operational readiness, if you will. That's one way I like to look at it. And then kind of talk about the methods of achievement of it and how to kind of break it down to where it's manageable and achievable. So the first question really is, what is your objective? What are you calling operational readiness? What's your definition, right? We find in many sites that, there's a big chasm between the project mode and the run mode, right? The operations is when someone hands over the keys and the turnover package or whatever and says, okay, I had it, you got it. And that is probably not the right approach to achieve operational readiness. It should be a continuum, not a big, bridge with, across the chasm that where they never really saw each other. So when you think about what the objectives are, some of the four that are listed here, I would argue 3 of them might fall a little short, but they're not uncommon for people to choose as an objective, right? So project mode folks might think in terms of the capital project's complete, or the expansion, or the what have you, and we're done with all of our qualification, and we're good to go. Another objective might be, ready for PPQ lots or licensure, completion of an inspection and all that good stuff. I would argue that this is probably one of the better definitions, which is achieving a design run rate at a targeted cost of goods, right? Now, run rate could be yield, it could be production and release, it depends on the business, of course, in the product. One thing we do know is that it often takes about a year or two and there's a number of statistics on this fact, that from licensure and startup really to actually achieve a level of production that you had strived for. Which brings us to what operational readiness is, right? The asset that we all own or run or what have you begins at concept and design and moves all the way to decommission. This table here should be a continuum. And as I said, often there's a big chasm in this turnover space before it goes to operations. So what we'd like to see is a view like the blue line here. So one term that you'll see in a lot of industries that I don't hear as much in pharmaceutical and biotech is the term vertical startup. The vertical startup is when you've finished your capital project, your testing is finished, and you are starting up, and you have a design startup time, a certain amount of time that you've allocated that it takes to start up and get to run mode. Ideally, that's as vertical as possible, and you hit your stride at startup, meaning you are hitting your operational expectation right at startup. What's more common is the orange line. Startup gets delayed, we finally get running, and then there's all kinds of issues, deviations, etc., reruns, go back to engineering runs again, et cetera, some remediation, et cetera. Then you start building back up, and sometimes you don't even get there, or you certainly don't get there consistently. Therefore, you weren't operationally ready, you could argue. Now, notice the graph. The x-axis is time, of course. The y-axis being released product. Now, it might be something else, as we talked about earlier. But you should know what your scoreboard metric is. And in fact, I'll take it a step further. Your whole organization should know what that scoreboard metric is. What is it that's on the board that says we must produce X number of vials or X amount of yield or whatever on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, whatever that metric is, and everyone knows what it is, and everyone knows what they're striving for, and we're actually tracking our status such that we can vary our production and our workload and our focus and energy toward achieving that goal, right? That's a rallying point for your whole organization, but it's often not clearly stated for the whole organization and maybe not even clearly defined. So that's something right off the bat that you can do to help improve operational readiness. Moving on though, let's look deeper at what the problem statement is. What causes that orange line? What causes the orange line is the fact that there will be issues. There always are issues. Always will be, no avoiding it. So the question is, how well did you prepare and build a mitigation and risk attenuation strategy on all those issues? Did you run all the foreseeable issues to ground as much as possible? Did you plan for them and build risk controls in well prior to startup? That's what operational readiness really is. If you get all of, and these bar graphs indicate issues, right? And I should have pointed that out earlier. So you're going to have issues at all times, right? But you want those issues to be found and identified. And, you know, this industry isn't new. And yes, there's new novel therapies and all kinds of methods that continue to improve. So we will see new issues. That's not arguable. But most of them, you can kind of predict what's going to happen. And what happens, of course, is this timeline, by nature of our industry, needs to get crunched. Therefore, we do the best we can with the resources we have, and we aren't able to get to all these issues. Or maybe we didn't take the time to really identify the ones that we know we're likely to have and put a risk mitigation strategy in place or methods in place prior. That's the objective of operational readiness. Now, that may sound theoretical and academic, and it is on a graph like this. Let's dive into what these issue bar graphs really are, and we'll do that here in a minute. But in addition to not starting up on time and not achieving design production or yield or what have you, which obviously costs the organization money and resources, and it does not help us achieve our financial goals. The other risks associated with non-readiness are these three. There are others, I'm sure, but these three are really big ones, and they're costly, in addition to not getting the desired productivity, right? So cost of goods sold, when, you know, costs get out of control because everything's a Herculean effort, right? We do these quick fixes to, you know, on a supply chain issue or a downstream challenge or whatever, and somebody just pulls magic out of the air and makes it happen. Well, we can't do that with every batch. It's just not, it's not sustainable at a cost level, right? Deviations, goes without saying. The industry generally identifies deviation costs per deviation somewhere in the tens of thousands, you know, 25 to 55,000. It's going to vary by site and product and all that good stuff. And this certainly does not account for the downtime that can often happen on a line due to deviation. That's not even included in those numbers. Turnover is a costly thing. I mean, we've all been there. You get a certain amount of experience, even expertise, and then some of your best folks or just some of your staff moves on to something else. You know, in today's tight labor market, it's challenging to keep people. there are things you can do to mitigate some of those issues as well, to keep the turnover from being so costly. And that's direct cost there, that 50 to 170K. There's obviously some soft costs there with loss of a particular set of expertise. So what's the path? How do we actually achieve this? And we're going to dive deeper into those issue areas to make it more functional, make it more achievable, right? Break it down a bit. But first, we got to look at this. I mentioned it earlier. The leadership of the organization, the site, et cetera, has got to be aligned on the direction. What's the vision? What's the key metric, the scoreboard metric, as we call it? And what are the metrics we're going to track and trend in KPIs, if you will, the key performance indicators that are going to tell us how we're doing. That should be all agreed to. Everyone in the leadership organization must agree. And some of us have experienced sites where there's a bit of a clash between this department and that department as to priorities, resources, budget allocations, all that stuff, as well as just directional variation, right? Some people think we should be going this direction versus that direction, and there's a little bit of conflict. Debate's good and it's healthy in a leadership team, but at the end of the day, they need to be aligned, and that alignment needs to show that face to the organization. That's key, because every employee is going to operate against that vision, and they want to contribute to that vision, right? And if they feel detached from it or unclear on it, then they're very likely to grow apathetic, maybe just punch the clock, maybe even just go, there's better places to work. They might get frustrated, et cetera, right? What am I working toward? What's my contribution? All that kind of thing. So this process of that leadership alignment and then stepping through these various efforts, we'll step through here in a minute. But before we go any further, let's talk about leadership alignment one more time. Have you set your goals, and are they clear, visible, and tracked? I don't want to beat that dead horse, but I'll say it again. Things like this, how many lots per month, how many days to release, what is our target? What's our big scoreboard metric? And is everybody's rowing in that same direction? And some of the metrics that you might choose to support that major metric would be these, right? From an operations standpoint, OEE is a pretty common one across organizations. Again, we see that a lot in lots of industries. OEE, I see it some in pharmaceutical and biotech, but not necessarily as prevalent as it might be in, say, chemical, steel, automotive, et cetera. There's also, quality metrics, of course, procedural metrics, right? And I like the procedure one because what's the number one hit from a regulatory compliance standpoint? It's failure to follow SOPs or use SOPs, right? And there's 3 or 4 different ways that gets worded in observations. We should be tracking that. How effectively are we using our SOPs? And we can get to that when we get to the human side of things. But the reality is, if someone's not following the SOP, it's generally not because they're just being obstinate and they don't want to follow the SOP. There's usually a reason. Maybe it's complicated. Maybe it's not all that well written. Maybe it's not all that useful. Maybe there's a culture of just using the batch record, not even paying attention to the SOPs, whatever, all those things. Maybe it's just not practical. I've been at sites where there is no easy way to get the SOPs into the space. That's a problem that needs to be overcome. Those are examples of some of the things you might track. Obviously, from a talent standpoint, you can track turnover, your talent pipeline, your time to fill roles and time to qualify people to be productive on the floor, et cetera. And then, workplace effectiveness. That is measurable. You can put some parameters around that. And then for each of those metrics, you want to actually baseline it and then trend it, right? Don't just say we're tracking these things. You need to be tracking how they're doing and looking for trends, looking for outliers, et cetera, problems. So back to the path. So after you've done that organizational level step, now you need to shift to a work stream mode. Each of the work streams associated with operational readiness would follow a path, the rest of the stair steps, in a collaborative way, of course, and cross communicating way. We'll get to the work streams in a minute, but I want to step through these next steps. So there should be a set of process flows for each work stream that supports that main objective, right? And we should assess the risk and set some priorities and some control parameters around those risks, right? What are the things that are going to cause issues? We know them. We've been in this industry for a long time. We know what's going to happen in the area of quality, in the area of QC and labs, in the area of IT and data integrity. We can foresee them. Let's play them out, right? Then there's your talent plan and role clarity, right? Talent plan is more than just a staffing plan, but the staffing plan is a big part of it, right? Who am I going to bring on when? Am I going to staff up my whole operational floor in all my labs and engineering and so forth, 18 months before startup? No, probably not. You don't need to. But what you do need to do is have those system owners, those SMEs, those work stream owners. Those are the people that are going to have the experience to know what the risk controls, what the risk priorities are and those controls. They'll know what the issues are they're going to see, and they'll have some ideas of how to address them. They'll also be the ones to identify what staff we need next and when, so that we are careful with our budget and still getting the right ramp up of staff. They're going to be the primary input to the SOPs, if not the authors. Depends on the organization, the way you do things. They'll typically spec equipment and develop the URS and so forth, right? User requirements and so forth. And they really should be those go-to SMEs who set the qualification path for future staff. So if I'm a filling operator system owner, right, for this system, I'm probably the best person to lay out what it means to be qualified filler operator, junior operator, senior operator, however you do that with your organization. That SME, that system owner, is probably the best person to give that input to the training team or whoever's developing those qualification programs and training programs. And then finally, you reach this point where you're actually at operational excellence. Now you're tracking and trending metrics. You've got a knowledge management. That's what KM is, where we're passing down our knowledge, and it's not tribal. It's actually captured and transferred to people. And there's continuous improvement program that's structured in a cadence fashion. So that's the path to achieve it. Again, sounds academic, but now let's get into the practical. What are those work streams that we're going to map out the process? We're going to lay out the risks and the priorities in the control plan, and then we're going to build the staffing, the expertise, the user requirements, the SOPs, and so forth. And these are this is CAI and our view, if you will, of what those work streams are, and I believe in those. And they're certainly debatable. You can slice them differently and whatever. But the key, as I said, is to follow that path along each of these work streams. Now, what does that mean? What that really means is you need a work stream owner for every one of these, right? It's not, unfortunately, what often happens is we have this capital project or this expansion project or this new drug that we're bringing in or what have you. And what we do is we hire a wave of people and say, they're smart, they're capable, they're experienced, they know how to do this, and set them sail. Maybe a little bit of collaboration at the beginning, maybe occasional, daily, weekly meetings, status meetings or whatever. But that's not the right answer. The right answer is to take each of these work streams, have them work toward that common goal that we already established together, and build a risk mitigation plan with milestones and a timeline. It's basically a project plan for every work stream along that stair step that we showed earlier. Let's dive in a little deeper what that means. So to develop a work stream plan, I would suggest the first thing you need to do is a work stream owner, right, for every one of those work streams. Define what excellence is in that work stream. If you've hired the right person as a work stream owner, they know what good means and what excellent means in that space. Right? Assess your current state against each. Now, if you're early in the expansion project or a new capital project or whatever, okay, your current state is 0. I understand that. But, you can also take an inventory of the level of experience you have in your leadership team and those you do have on the site. What is the current state of the facility, if it's brownfield or expansion or whatever, such that what's our experience with this equipment or this process or that process that we're going to be adding, right? The tech transfer, kind of knowledge, and is that sufficient, right? That's the kind of stuff you're looking at current state. And then we engage a team of folks with that owner engages the right team of stakeholders, a small team of stakeholders who identify and run those risks to ground, right? And they develop a prioritized action plan with milestones. Now, what you're seeing over here is an example assessment. We use an assessment model for every one of the work streams. So in this case, supply chain, we're going to do an assessment of where you stand on supply chain in all of these areas, right? That kind of gives you a baseline, as we talked about earlier. And then you can say, wow, okay, it looks like we're doing okay in kind of the vendor side of things, but some of our program, some of our systems methods, spare parts management and serialization is not so good. So we need in data systems. So we need to work on that, for example, right? Let me take you over to this little tool here. This is a collaborative board here called Miro. And what I've built here is an example that we use often in projects, right? Essentially, this is a set of work stream plans, right, for operational readiness. So the site might already have a design and construction plan. All right. Now here's some milestones, major milestones. Let me grow that up just a little bit. I think I need to blow that up just a little. And so for design and construction, basic design reviews and all that kind of stuff, all the way through to substantial completion, right? In the meantime, there's your CQV and testing phase, right? So you have a C&Q plan, a commissioning qualification plan, and validation mesh plan, all that good stuff. And you move all the way through to, IOQs and then engineering runs and so forth, right? Those are well known and well established, and people understand the need for that. Where operational readiness comes in is along those same timelines. You should have a set of objectives and milestones associated with organizational structure, right? That leadership alignment. What are my primary objectives and metrics? Work stream owners assigned. And I have a rough talent and staffing plan to start with, right? We can touch on what that means in just a little bit. But now I'm not in the work stream mode yet. This is overarching for the whole company, right? Now that work stream owner starts building their process flows and vets out what risks they have, and then they can do their own user requirements and specs, build their own staffing plan for that work stream, and eventually the organization does need its own policies and procedures. At that point, now you're in different work streams. So here's some work streams that some of the ones we identified in that previous slide: quality, regulatory, analytical, and EMPQ, engineering and maintenance, right? Talent, human performance. All of those things are work streams that require a work stream owner and in best practice, someone who knows this part of the business, not just relying on someone keeping their fingers crossed and hoping it works. I didn't put supply chain in here. This is somewhat random as to what I put in here, but I would add supply chain as a primary risk area, right? That needs to be vetted as well. There should be a plan for each one of these. So in the area of, for instance, of what's my regulatory pathway? What's my pathway to regulatory approval? Well, we have to know the drug and all that kind of stuff, which requires, as I mentioned, you have to have the overarching process flows. You'd better have your process flows defined so that you know what the heck you're doing, so that you can build a QMS around it and a regulatory strategy and all that good stuff. So these are highly integrated and interrelated, right? There are precedents. This does not show those other than this one line, just for the sake of illustration. But the reality is, what often happens is, okay, staffing wave one and staffing wave two, we just start bringing people on and have them get busy and get this stuff done. If you don't have ownership of every one of these work streams and a clear milestone planned out plan, you're going to struggle with those issues we talked about earlier in that graphic. So again, that expertise is really key. Let me get back to the PowerPoint if I could. A staffing plan, by the way, looks something like this. This is a Gantt chart, pretty common approach. You don't need to hire everybody all at once. That work stream owner should know who they need when, and put a kind of I would like to have them at this window, but no later than this date, right? That kind of plan is appropriate. And that's one of the risk mitigation strategies, right? This is one of the things that's going to keep you out of trouble, because you got to write SOPs. You got to do qualification. You've got to get everybody qualified for gowning, right? All of that stuff has to happen. Somebody's got to build the programs to do it, and people have to start doing it, right? For example, you have to have a maintenance strategy. What's my am I going with a CMMS, or am I just gonna use spreadsheets or whatever? All of that stuff has to be decided and laid out based on budget and need and risk and all those things, right? The experts of the work stream should know what the issues are likely to be and the mitigation of those risks. If we dive deeper, now you can get into some of the elements in each work stream. This graphic, although I'm not going to spend any further time on it, gives you a sense that there is a lot to do in every one of these work streams. And you could feasibly assign ownership to every one of these, assuming they all apply. Now, based on your business, it may vary as to which of these apply and so forth. But all of these work streams should have a main owner and maybe a small staff originally, maybe just one person at first, and then it grows to a few, and then next, a set of SMEs, and then eventually you've got a full staff in each of these work streams, right? So I'm going to pause there for a minute and see if we have any questions, either typed in or on the phone or whatever. Anybody? Thoughts? All right. Well, we'll move in. So that's why I call it a workshop, because ultimately you could take this diagram or the other diagram I had on that Miro board, and we could discuss what it means to build a plan along every one of those. And you, for your site, should look at this diagram, for example, and say, okay, which of these apply to me at first? Let's X out the ones that don't apply to me for whatever reason. Maybe I don't do development on my side of things, so certain things don't happen there. Or maybe whatever. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you. Catherine made a comment in the chat box. She says, my team and I don't have any at the moment.
Any work streams, or maybe here, let's take
any questions? Gotcha.
Oh, okay. Any questions? Okay, got it. Very good. Okay, very good. Okay, thank you, Catherine. I appreciate that. But when you think about one of the exercises that we like to do with folks in a workshop setting would be, as I was just about to say, you take every one of these. Okay, which ones don't apply? Let's X those out because of our business or what have you. Okay, now, which ones do we have? Do we have someone with sufficient experience? You don't have to be a full-blown expert at this point. Depends on where you are in the journey, but somebody with sufficient expertise along each one of these work streams to make sure we've at least identified a plan, a risk assessment, if you will. Assess all the risks that are in each of those areas, and we have some semblance of a plan as to how we're going to address those risk items, right? Mitigate them, right? Initially. Now, as you go further along and closer to startup, it better get more and more solid, right? But you can start out with this, and then you say, okay, could I assign a name to every one of those work streams? And then eventually, can I assign a name to every one of these squares that applies to me? Someone that owns it. Now, when I say work stream owner and element owner, I don't mean somebody who's, I'm a pack mule and, oh yeah, Mary over here, she's great. She is so good. We're just going to give her 18 of these things. Okay, well, that's not an owner. That person is spread too thin. It's not going to work. And we've all seen it. We've all probably done it, right? That's not the answer. The answer is that person has to, I'm not saying everybody, it's a one-to-one, but that person has to have the authority, the resources, and the bandwidth, the focus and budget and all that kind of stuff to really vet out the needs in that space. If we let CSV be one of 18 things on someone's list in engineering or IT or wherever that belongs in your organization, it will not be successful. I can tell you that right now, right? If, however, you give it someone as a focused area because it's a major risk concern to you, then it can be done right. Now, do you have the resources to assign one of these to one-to-one to people? Maybe not, You can also look at this as a development opportunity too, for those people who are good in a certain area, but they could use some, stepping up and showing their worth in, the next level. Whoever, the person assigned to the batch records or SOPs, boy, we all know people get assigned SOP writing and review, and it's line item 35 on their list of priorities, right? And what ends up happening? Well, the SOPs are going through final review and approval, literally hours, sometimes minutes before the first run, right? Not ideal, let's just say. And in fact, that's why you get those bar graph spikes in the readiness curve that create the orange graph instead of the nice blue startup graph, right? That's an example, obviously. So we've all seen it. Let's put a little bit of forethought into this. And I guess the real moral is, we know these issues. We know what it takes to be good, or someone knows what it takes to be good and excellent in every one of these. Let's make sure it's assigned properly to do so. With that, we'll move on to in the article for that ISPE put out for the event. We did say we were going to talk about the leadership and organizational health and issues. So I want to make sure we address that specifically. Organizational health and talent is a major risk area. It's an area that I certainly feel passionately about. So more than a staffing plan, you need a talent plan, right? What does it mean to have people perform well? Well, it starts with clear organizational health, right? How healthy is your organization in these areas? And these are some of the things that you can look at. You can trend and, assess and trend and track. I think I do see a comment. I want to see. Nathan, is there, maybe you can take a look and see what that is, if you don't mind, if there is anything.
Yes, it says, question from Catherine. Most of us are not at the leadership level. Do you have any tips on how best to communicate this information to our site leadership?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I believe one of the best things that our employees can do, and I've, been there, you're on the floor, you want to see more cohesion between the leadership direction and the operations. My experience, operators, technicians, engineers can call for a method that is continuous improvement mindset, right? If you're a lean person, if you've heard the term Kaizen, I don't mean to throw a bunch of, lean terms and make a bunch of eye rolls out of everybody, but the Kaizen event really is a wonderful concept. In the ideal world, there are the folks performing the work, and there are the folks driving the organization. And in an ideal world, there is regularity to the connection between the two. And there's all kinds of tools and methods for doing so. But I think the best one is a continuous improvement mindset with a regular cadence, if you will. And I like the term cadence because it implies, very regular, structured, and you don't miss it. You don't miss a beat. So for instance, maybe every week there is a 2-hour block of time that, and it sounds crazy, you don't need more meetings, all that stuff, but a 2-hour block of time where the right stakeholders come to the table with leadership and project management or whomever, and operations, stakeholders who are doing the work, are closest to the work, know where the problems lie or the risks lie, or have ideas for improvement, and we regularly connect. So I encourage the operations folks, the quality folks, the folks in the engineering and the labs to request that kind of setup, to where there's regular opportunity for two-way communication about how to do things better. Whether you're in the production mode already and you're already operating and you're looking to continue, or you're preparing, as I've been implying here with some of my content earlier, we're preparing for the next wave or the expansion or the new build or what have you. That team needs to come together with some regularity and run some of the major issues to ground. and it should not be directorial. It should be led. It should be facilitated well and led by the folks who know the problems best, or the opportunities for improvement best. So that's one of the tools that I strongly recommend. I have, many of us have models for that, and we'd be happy to share those. I've shared those at previous ISPE events, and I'm happy to do it again. A tool called a continuous improvement model, and I'd be happy to share that with folks on the call. As I said, I've done that in the past with ISP. So that's one of my biggest ones. The other is your stand-up meeting. I'm a big fan of the stand-up meeting. We don't need more meetings, right? And here I am promoting another meeting, right? But with a purpose, right? The stand-up meeting, on the other hand, is everything from the shift turnover to the status board check or whatever. And the stand-up meeting is your 15-minute meeting. Should never be more than half an hour. Should be a small group in every cell of the organization. And that stand-up meeting is, okay, we got that plan, that operational readiness plan we just showed you with the diamonds and all that. All right, how are we standing on this? Where's the risk? Well, this one's falling short. We're behind. Okay, Bill, why is that behind? Well, we've got this issue and this issue. Okay, who's got the ownership of that? Great, let's move on. That's the stand-up meeting. Or I'm doing a shift turnover, right? I'm doing a shift turnover, and in the shift turnover, I talk about the current state, what we've accomplished in the last shift, what's expected on this shift and the one beyond. Where are we falling behind? Are we ahead? Are we stuck on something because of some engineering issue we got to take care of, or a maintenance issue? And everybody's aware of the issue, and then you move on. Again, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes the most, and then everybody's on the same page. That's also the opportunity for you to say, I've noticed this problem. I think we could do it a better way. Okay, great. We've identified it. Let's give it ownership and take it to that continuous improvement method we just talked about. That's how I suggest this. If that becomes culture in your organization, you've made a step change to your organizational health. If you do those two things, and again, communication, right? Communication is the key, and it fosters engagement and so forth. I've been in organizations where they try to get company engagement through picnics and all that stuff, and that's great. It's it's a lot of fun, and you get to know each other. I'm not arguing that, right? But in my mind, engagement really comes when I feel like my voice is heard. I'm valuable to valuably contributing to the bigger picture and the bigger goals. I have job satisfaction. I have opportunity to grow and learn new things and be a bigger part of the organization. So in my mind, that's where you focus your energy. Great question, long answer. Sorry. There's more you can do, but those are the two that I recommend first. And I recommend them to senior leadership as much as I do to the operations organization as well. So then you move into your talent plan. And again, if you're not leaders, I understand you may not be thinking about a talent plan and so forth, but someone needs to be thinking about the talent plan for this organization such that the operational readiness is complete, and we're running all those issues to ground, because the human element is the key. It's going to become your largest cost, and it's your best opportunity for success, and it's also your greatest risk. Talent plan is not just a staffing plan, and it's not just an HR play, although HR has a role, right? It's more to do with this. How does your organization function with all the people that you have, right? And you might have objectives, right? Maybe currently we're dealing with silos and departments, and there's not clarity and ownership and harmonization, all that kind of stuff. Those are some of the things you want to overcome with a talent plan. And I will tell you, this is right along the lines of how I answered that question. There are 7 factors, and I've vetted this for years and years and years. There's lots of studies on all kinds of this stuff. At the end of the day, it boils down to these 7 areas, right? These are the factors that affect human performance in the workplace. These are workplace factors, right? There's a lot of outside factors and other things, and you could argue about the cleanliness of the bathroom and all that kind of stuff. Those are all factors too, but that's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is the major items, the things that are organizational that tell me whether our people are going to perform well or they're not going to perform so well. And they are kind of an order of priority to a degree, although the middle area gets kind of muddled. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but I want to introduce you to these since we do have the time, and I think it relates very closely to the effectiveness of an operation. So let's dive into the first one. I've talked about this already. I'm not going to spend a lot more time on it, but if the alignment is clear on the purpose and the direction and the scoreboard metric and what everybody's swimming toward or rowing toward, then it's going to be that much more successful. You will have reduced errors because people are following procedures because they get it, they understand it, and we know what the priorities are. I don't follow procedures because I'm told to follow procedures. I follow procedures because it makes sense, because it's going to help us achieve the goal, right? That's a different mindset that unfortunately some leadership doesn't quite grasp, right? So we need to help them recognize that. For each of these items, what I've done is I've broken down what a description, the description of the item, what it means, and then the impact, either positive or negative, red or green, as to whether or not, how it's going to impact, our personnel performance. Role clarity. I got to know what my role is and how it contributes to the greater good, right? If I understand that, I'm going to do a better job. It's that simple. Otherwise, I'm punching the clock and just doing my job, right? And nobody likes that, and it leads to errors. It leads to apathy and even turnover, right? Exhaustion. Sometimes I'm just doing too much because I have no focus on any given priority. Everything's a priority. That issue. We've all dealt with that. These are the things where clear expectations, good leadership to help keep the priorities clean. That's the key. My favorite conflicting priority, not my favorite, it's my least favorite conflicting priority. The most common in our industry is quality versus time, right? Right first time, except when we're in a hurry, right? That seems to be our motto sometimes in this industry. Let's not let that happen. Let's keep the right first time truly focused and give ownership where it needs to be given. Connections, how we connect with our coworkers. That's communication, like I already talked about. That's the major area. Accountability, mutual accountability at all levels, right? I should be just as comfortable if I'm CEO being held accountable by anyone in the organization at any level for something I said I was going to do. And I truly believe that. And that's a healthy organization when you can have that kind of friendly, respectful accountability across the board. Right. Otherwise, you get factions, politics, rumors, disengagement, et cetera, right? And lack of trust. A good development and training and qualification program. People can learn new skills, progress. That's got a lot of value, right? At the individual level, at the productivity level, and at the flexibility level. If my organization has enough qualified people in enough areas, I've got bench strength. Now I've got the flexibility to, 3 people call off sick, I'm still good downstream. Or if someone rolls off and moves over to, and goes over to another site, leaves the company, whatever, I can backfill them, fairly well with sufficient expertise, right? That's very important, and it's very important and rewarding to individuals as well. This one here is the one I talked about with the continuous improvement program. If I had a room of CEOs and senior leaders, this is where I would focus there. If they told me you can only improve one thing in our organization, I would say this. This is it. It's that continuous improvement mindset that engages all employees in the effort. And that should come from every level. Every single person in the organization should feel very comfortable participating, raising their hand, and actively pursuing improvement. When you don't have this in an organization, or you have resistance to it in an organization, that's when you start getting the language like they and them. As soon as people start dropping theys and thems in the organization, you got problems. That's when you need to, it doesn't mean you throw up your hands and walk away. What it means is you need to work that problem to ground. We need to work across all aspects of the organization to overcome this kind of us versus them mentality and get them all on the same, get everybody on the same page, right? And there's nothing more rewarding than being part of an improvement project that actually saw returns. That's very inspiring. Pay and incentives has to be right. I'm going to spend a lot of time on this. Obviously, the bigger thing, the eye-opening thing for a lot of folks in organizations, and this industry still has a lot to learn in this space. I'm going to be fair with you. It's not just about pay and benefits. We know that, right? It's the intangibles. You see, when the intangibles outweigh the burden, then we're good. But as soon as the intangibles go over here, that's when I start looking elsewhere, right? That's when I start getting beleaguered and bitter, right? Because I'm a pack mule. There, you know, no priority. Everything's a priority. I don't have time for as much as I got to do. Those are examples of the intangibles, right? Unreasonable deadlines, unreasonable expectations, lack of or continuously changing priorities. Those are those intangibles that just, I don't get paid enough for this, you know, that kind of attitude, right? Finally, the hiring and advancement. I've got plenty of stories on this. Not something we can all do something about. You know, it is a tight talent market and all that, but the key is we don't want competing sets of standards, right? If we hold high standards for each other across the board, we should, when we have those high expectations, that's when peer accountability works, right? If someone's not pulling their weight, their peers tell them about it, and we respectfully, and then we solve the problem together, right? And leadership recognizes it, and they respectfully help people get to a better standard of work, right? As soon as we start reducing our standards with one group versus another, one person versus another, whatever, that's when resentment comes in, right? And we've all seen it where, you know, there's maybe a bunch of errors in a batch record and the whole department is pulled into the room and chastised or whatever, or everybody's got to retrain or whatever. And it was probably two people that caused all the problems, right? That's an example of where, you know, we got to be careful and make sure that we help people achieve the higher standard across the board. So here's that table filled in, and I'll leave that with you. I will provide this through ISPE as a tool if you find it useful. It basically summarizes all of the stuff we just talked about. That's something you know certainly easily share with leadership of the organizations if you like, and I'm happy as well as Nathan and others, I'm sure, and ISPE folks would be happy to discuss this further with anybody who's interested. All right. There are no shortcuts to this kind of stuff. It's just the bottom line, whether it's an operational readiness work stream or if it's some of the talent planning stuff. If you get it right, it multiplies itself. If you get role clarity and a training and qualification program right, you get high returns. If you try to shortcut any of those things and you only deal with one issue and not the other or whatever, you are not going to multiply your results. And you'll have high costs of goods sold, you'll have turnover, you'll have deviations, errors, etc. Right. And then, you know, this last slide is really kind of accountability and action planning for an organization. Who's ultimately responsible for those things? And this is an advice that I give to leaders. So we'll spend a lot more time on this. In the end of the day, here's the ins and outs of operational readiness. It requires people, effective process and procedure, good physical plant and supply chain, right? Those three come in and you get your targeted objectives at sustainable costs. That's what operational readiness is to me. I hope you found this useful. I open it up to any further questions. Nathan, do we have anything in the queue or thoughts?
I don't see any right now.
Okay.
Catherine, Margaret, if you guys have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and speak or put it in the chat box. I definitely want to thank you for the time today, Harry. And then
Sure.
Catherine, Margaret, thank you again for joining as well.
Indeed. I'm sorry, Nathan.
Oh, I was just saying thank you.
Yeah.
I'm trying to, I'll give them a minute to see if
Sure,
anybody's.
I'll stick around for a few minutes.
So,
yeah, you bet. And I want to thank ISPE. I appreciate the opportunity to present. Always happy to.
We definitely appreciate it.
Connections here. What's that?
I said we definitely appreciate it. Your data integrity, the human side or the human element of data integrity last February was definitely a big hit. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions. So thank you, Harry. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Margaret. Oh, Catherine says, what is the one initiative that they drove that had the biggest impact?
When you say they, okay, so let me think about that. It does vary. I mean, I've been involved in so many sites, as I'm sure many of you have too. But in my role, I get involved with a lot of sites that are both trying to start up and prepare, as well, for an expansion or what have you, as well as those that are dealing with remediation situations, maybe 483s and other observations that they're trying to overcome. And I gotta say that organizational health piece, where there's a sense that everybody's in this together and everybody is bringing their viewpoint and knowledge to the table. I know I emphasized it several times, but that mentality of continuous improvement, while that doesn't happen overnight, you can institute it overnight. You can start it tomorrow by saying, you know what, once a week, we're going to have this 2-hour meeting, or every 2 weeks, or whatever it is. And we're going to take a major issue and run it to ground with the key stakeholders, not 50 people in the room, the key stakeholders. And we're going to make sure across the organization, those people get to participate and give their input. That to me has the greatest, both short-term and long-term effect. The example that I'll send following this actually has a form that you can fill out. And this isn't a form you slide into the suggestion box in the cafeteria, right? We're talking, I've got an idea because I'm living this thing. This filter integrity test, I think, is the example I use in the document I'll send you. I know there's a better way. It's out of place in the process. It should be over here, or it should be done in this way, or whatever. And that's causing a lot of deviations. I know we can do this better. You're not going to solve that. And someone in a conference room thinking about problems is not going to solve that. And looking at batch records, the people on the floor are going to solve that, right? Or quality, or people that are seeing the problem are going to solve that and bring it to the attention. They're going to come with solutions on how to improve that. That to me is probably the biggest impact. Now, when it comes to overall arching operational readiness, the number one thing you can do is assign those work stream owners and give them the focus, the priority, the resources, and the authority to march forward in their work stream. So those are probably two of my best answers to that question. Is there another question? I thought I saw another one pop up. Nathan.
Catherine just expanded on her question, said you specifically.
Oh, me. Okay. Well, those are mine. Most definitely. There are other things you can do. Obviously, all of those things in that table, and some of them take longer than others. Some of them are very cultural and takes quite a bit of time to change. But those two things, whether you're just getting into the operational readiness mode or you're into remediation improvement, those two things I'd say would be the key.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. Appreciate it. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, ISPE. Appreciate that.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you guys again, Catherine, Margaret. I definitely appreciate you joining. And Harry, again, as always, thank you for presenting. And are we going to be able to, I think you said that we're going to be able to send this on to everybody that participated today. So
I'll send the PowerPoint as well as a couple of the tools that I mentioned.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Harry. Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
You too.